needs to be discussed, so that people can just have a greater understanding about how to process through grief and loss with God, and just receive some tools and insights on how to heal and how to really seek God for what your unique process might look like, what your unique needs are through whatever your grief and loss process is. So yes, join us today and tag someone, share this live with someone. And we're just going to take a few moments just to share the live ourselves and invite people as well. And then we're going to go ahead and get started. We're excited about this topic, especially because we have a new book that we have written called Processing Through Grief and Loss. Apostle Taquita Baker has written this book and really has received a divine download from God on how to process through grief and loss, and how to teach others how to process through grief and loss. And this book is available on kingdomshiftingbooks.com. If you would like to get your own copy, it's a book that you can walk with throughout your journey and even share with others. So this is definitely a topic that we want to dive deeper into today. And so I will just go ahead and get our dialogue and our discussion started today. My name is Nina, as you can see, and we have today Apostle Taquita Baker and Coach Mercedes Carr, and they have been doing the Facebook Lives and even Clubhouse rooms on this topic of grief and loss, and we have had the opportunity to really encounter and just have open, vulnerable discussion with people where they have shared with us their personal experience and encounters with grief and loss. And we have really been able to hit the ground running with creating an open space, a vulnerable space where you can share your true experience with grief and loss, and just receive our personal testimonies and experiences with grief and loss as well. And so today, the first question that I just want to ask to Coach Mercedes and Apostle Taquita is, what has been your experience in dealing with anger and grief and loss? This is a big one. It's something that I see up and down my timeline quite a bit as far as people sharing just their personal hurts and thoughts about being angry about the grief and loss that they have suffered, and many even being angry with God and blaming God for what they are going through. So, but I don't want to get too ahead of us. That's a few questions down. So just tell us, what has been your experience in dealing with anger and grief and loss? Whoever wants to kick us off, go right ahead.
Yes, I can share. So if you were here with us last week, I shared a lot about my grieving process with a big death that took place in my life. And I shared how that was a supernatural experience where the peace of God really navigated and guided me through that. And so when I think of that big situation and that big loss for myself, I definitely feel like I skipped the stage of anger when it comes to the process of grief and loss. So many people will go through denial, they'll go through anger, they'll go through bargaining with God. God, if you just do this, if you just allow them to stay a little longer, then, I'll do A, B, C, D. I definitely skipped the anger phase. But what I can say is that I have processed through anger, not with necessarily grief from a death, but loss of relationships, loss of certain things that I felt like was a promise of God, or that I felt like, people who are supposed to be in my life. And so, for example, I've had certain relationships where I was like, okay, I believe this is a relationship that, is from God. And I was very immature at the time and didn't necessarily know what God's standard or his plans were for my life. But I remember being so shocked and upset that the relationship ended. And for me, it felt like a literal death. It didn't feel like a breakup. It didn't feel like a disconnect. It felt like a death. And so the process for me in that certain situation was I was going from that stage of bargaining with God where I said, well, God, I thought if I did A, B, C, D, we would be able to salvage the relationship. I thought that this was, a part of your plan. I thought that this was going to work out. And then it shifted into a place of anger and almost entitlement where it was like, I deserve to have this, and sometimes people even who are dealing with the grief or the anger of losing a loved one by death, sometimes have that feeling or that emotion of, I deserve to have them still in my life. They deserve to be here to see our kids grow up or, to see their grandkids or whatever the case may be. And so I think a lot of times with the anger comes the lack of understanding and knowledge of why it took place and not really having clarity or a true substance in regards to why things couldn't have gone another way. And so I think that anger in the grieving process is completely normal. I think it's completely okay to be angry. I think it's okay to be in a space to where, that frustration is coming out. But I think that when it comes to anger and grief in that process, you really have to get to the root of that anger and figure out, why am I angry and what am I really experiencing? Am I lashing out, but I'm really sad? Am I, being rageful, but I'm really just heartbroken? What is the true emotion that I'm experiencing? And what is the root of that? And then really processing that with God. And so for myself personally, like I said, in my past relationships, I had to really go before God and express to him why I was so mad, why I felt like I deserved that person in my life, and why I felt like I was being punished because that person was no longer in my life. And I think that that's something that a lot of people who have dealt with grief or loss of a loved one might be able to identify with, because it does feel like a sting and it feels like a punishment. And it feels like, if God could have done things differently, why didn't he? And so a lot of times people do question that. And so for myself personally, like I said, definitely skipped the anger phase when I was grieving an actual death, but have experienced that in relationships before, when the relationship felt like an actual loss or grieving process. So that's kind of been my experience. I haven't dealt with a whole lot of anger or rage in the grieving process.
Okay, yes, thank you for sharing on that. It seems like some of the key points that you brought out is it's okay if you are dealing with anger. You just don't want to stay in that place of anger. And like you shared, you really want to find out what the root of the anger is, because it may not just be anger. Like you shared, it may be sadness, it may be a lashing out, or a variety of different things. And so I can definitely agree with that. Getting to the root of the anger, receiving greater understanding and clarity about the anger and about just whatever that grief or loss was. And then being okay to ask questions and to feel and to feel okay if you are in a place where when you don't have all of the answers. And so I believe you brought out some definite great points on that aspect. Dr. Apostle Baker, do you have anything to add on that question?
Yes, I do. I think it's so important that when we're thinking about our relationship with God, that we're having a realistic relationship. Because oftentimes, because it is God, we want to act like we're not feeling a certain way or we're not challenged by something. And we act like if we just deny that, or we just suck it up, or we just, don't express that God doesn't know. And that's not the truth. If we're angry, we're angry. Our emotions are gauges. They help us to understand and to navigate where we are and what we need to process through so that we can shift to a better place of wellness. So when we're not really truly acknowledging our truth, when we're not really admitting our truth, or stuffing our truth, it just really delays our healing because we're trying to engage with life and people and God from a posture that is not realistic, and that is not the truth of what we really feel. And so God is moved by our infirmities. That's what the word says. And he is moved, and that word infirmities, one of the Greek words means feelings. He is moved by our feelings. He's moved by our emotions. Even though he's a spirit and we're worshiping him from spirit to spirit, He created us to have emotions. So he knew that we would get upset. He knew that we would get challenged, and all of these things. And so, your anger is valid, even your anger with God. And so one of the things that I teach people to do is to share their thoughts and feelings with God. I'm angry with you. I'm angry that you took this person. I'm angry that this person is not going to be here to see my children grow up. I'm angry that, this just came all of a sudden and, I didn't have a warning. I'm angry. Whatever it is that you're angry about in relations to that grief and loss, that needs to be shared with God. And even if you are angry with God, a lot of times when we start to express those thoughts and feelings, instead of stuffing them, we actually begin to feel better and we can hear God. But when we are not expressing them and we're allowing the anger just to continue to boil over inside of us, it really causes a wall and us to become hardened where we can't even hear God and receive the comfort of the Holy Spirit from him. And so we have to be okay with speaking truth and then allowing God to speak truth to us so that we can really exchange our anger for, for healing. A lot of times we think God isn't there for us. We think God betrayed us. God didn't answer us. God doesn't care about us like he cared about the other person because he healed the other person's loved one, but he didn't heal ours. Or, other people that we think should have passed away didn't pass away, but this person passed away. And we have all of these thoughts and feelings. And the only person that really can answer those questions is God. And so when you have anger like that, you really do have to take your thoughts and feelings to God and allow him to process with you. Now, I will say that sometimes we're not ready to know the truth. And I know that I had a situation of death where I wasn't ready to hear the truth. And so I just felt justified in my anger. I felt justified because I had prayed. I had stood on the miracle for the person that I wanted to be healed. And I had seen, I have seen consistent miracles in being able to bring others back from near-death experience or extreme sickness and just things like that. So I have an expectation that God's going to answer all my prayers or the way that I want them to be answered, or what have you. And really, prayer is not that's not the purpose of prayer. Prayer is really a posture of faith. And then we are trusting God to manifest his purpose, his will in the earth. Or if there are free will, issues involved, God is not going to override those free will issues. And I even talk about that in my book, because a lot of times there can be deaths, but there could be free will in operations. There could be legal rights that the enemy has, or that are certain illegal rights that are operating even in the family line or in that person's life that we don't even know about. And so God, he's an evolving God, but his principles His word, he does not override his word. His word stays. His word remains the same. His words and standards and principle going to be the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. That's what the word says. So a lot of times, God is not overriding some of the free wills or what have you. We also don't know what conversations God is having with that person. And so that person may want to go to heaven. That person may, or what have you. And we even think, I had one of my very close friends, she prayed consistently for a miracle. But one of the things that God told me was when she started to commune with heaven, she wanted to go with God. And so, it took me a year and a half to get that revelation. And really, it wasn't until I actually had a dream of seeing her in heaven that I really was comforted by that. Because when God actually told me that, I was like, I still wasn't willing to hear that. And I actually had a dream or what have you. And in my dream, I was in my old church, and me and her used to go to church together when we were younger. And I started to climb up like a trampoline type thing that was inside of the church. And my spiritual mother was actually the one leading me up the trampoline in this dream. And when I got to the top of the trampoline, it was like, my friend was up there, and she said, "Taquita, let me go. Let me go, Taquita. You need to let me go. Twin, you need to let me go." And I actually burst out crying in the dream. I was crying so hard that I woke up crying. I woke up out of the dream crying. And I began to see her communing in heaven with God, or what have you. And that's what really gave me peace about, okay, I really need to process to wellness. She where she want to be, or what have you. And it took me over a year and a half or more, probably almost 2 years or more to get that answer, because I wasn't really willing to accept the answer that God had given me. And so you can hang on to anger and not receive the truth of what God is saying because you still want your will. Me and my friend, we had talked about how we was going to grow old together, how we were going to be sitting on the porch as old women and talking about our, laughing at people as they go by and just, whatever. I mean, we had a very fun, very close relationship. So we had already had all these plans about our old age. And so I'm just like shook. I'm like, we got plans, or whatever. We gonna grow old together and all of these things. And that wasn't the case. And so I think that it is so important that when you have anger, even with God, that you navigate it and process it with God. And so I had to go back and ask God to forgive me for my anger and to help me not to be angry with him. And God had to help me process out of my anger. It wasn't like I just came up out of it. And so my answer would be to tell God the truth and repent, humble yourself, or whatever. I don't understand your decision. And, I need help at navigating through my anger and coming out of anger with you and just angry about the situation. And I need supernatural help. Help me. And, and as I began to do that, and God's love and comfort began to embody me, I just began to embrace his love and comfort and embrace the truth that this was the finite decision, and it was okay. It was okay if I didn't have those dreams that I thought that we were going to have in the future. I had the best time with her that I had when she was here on earth. And so I started to regard that, and even regard what legacy of hers could I continue to carry versus carrying the grief of her not being here. How can I carry the blessing of what I had with her and what we built while she was here? So that's my answer.
That was definitely very good. Thank you for sharing that. And some of the things that just stood out in what you just shared is learning how to regard the other person. And so learning how to regard the person that is sick and what they may be going through, because it can be so easy to just be so challenged with what they're going through, be challenged with their pain and wanting to see them healed and whole. However, they, like Apostle shared, they may be in a place where they are ready to transition with God, or they may be in a place where they want your prayers and they want you to continue fighting and contending against the sickness or whatever it may be. And so regarding that person, there can be a sense of selfishness when you are walking with someone who is sick. I know personally, I experienced that firsthand when my aunt passed a couple of years ago. She had been battling for a while, and we had been praying and and she did have a miracle, because she lived about 2 to 3 years longer than her prognosis. And I was still praying for her, to receive the full miracle. However, when I went to visit her for the last time, she has shared that she was ready to go. And so my posture had to then shift to praying for peace for her and just enjoying the time that we did have left with one another. And the dream aspect is very important, because I received a dream as well before she did pass, and it was just her calling my name out while I was asleep. And so it was kind of like just telling me, I'm okay, or just alerting me to where she was spiritually. And so just being open to hearing those differing perspectives, and a perspective that's not your own, even though your heart and your relationship with them, your closeness with them, of course, wants them to stay on earth with you. However, they may be in a different place. And I believe that right there, that openness to hear what that other person is enduring and where that other person is, can be a start of healing. A start of healing and cleansing from anger, because you realize that it's not necessarily something, even though the circumstances may be bad, it's not necessarily something being done to them. They have come into a place where they are okay to move forward with God. And so that I thought that was profound, Apostle, what you shared, and even getting to a place where you can shift your perspective from what you're losing to what can I carry forward? What am I gaining forward? What is the legacy that I'm gaining? What mantles from them are being dropped down that I can then carry? I know Apostle Baker received some different gifts and things from her sister that passed. You want to share a little bit on that, because that's a transference and something that you are carrying as a legacy forward.
Yes. So my sister friend, she actually was a dance minister, and she was a prophetic dance minister. And so I actually inherited a lot of her garments and a lot of her weaponry and flags and staffs and things of that nature. And so, I'm able to carry that part of her mantle into the earth as I would go forth and minister and things of that nature. And even recently, I was assisting my overseer with ordaining a bishop. And I wore the robe, one of the garment robes that my sister friend that I had inherited from her, what have you. And everybody was asking, can I have that robe? Can I have that robe? And I kept saying, well, this is my sister friend that passed. So this is very, very special to me. And so, just even in that, and then just asking God for revelation and insight of who she was in the earth and what she brought to the earth, and then continue to instill that in its own way, in what her and I was walking together in ministry, in doing, and just in life together. And I have been mindful of that with her, and even with another friend that I had that passed away, or what have you, and even just with my grandma, making sure that those blessings, those mantles, those legacies, or carry to the next generation. One of my other friends that passed away, I recently, I write ebooks, and I've written over 50 books, and I've read, I don't know, about 75 ebooks probably. And so one of my ebooks on deliverance and spiritual wellness, I put her picture on it, and I dedicated it to her, because even though she passed away from being sick, she was all about spiritual wellness, and she had such a pure heart and a pure spirit, and just known for just her beautiful spirit, just being a beautiful soul, and just her love and heart for God, and love and heart for people, and living in the purity and righteousness of God. So even as I shared those deliverance tools and things of that nature in that book, I put her picture on there, just honoring her and her legacy of who she is and what she brought to people's lives. And so there is so much more that we could be focused on as it relates to when someone passed away, and we're always so focused on not having them, instead of focused on making sure that who they are live on in a positive way in the earth, and just even in our hearts and in our souls. And even as we're talking about God, and making sure that we navigate our anger with God, it's so important that we really incline ourselves to Him. In John 14:26, it says, but not John 14:26. In Proverbs 4:20-22, it says, my son, attend to my ears, incline thy ears unto my sayings. Let them not depart from thine ears. Keep them in the midst of thine heart, for they are life unto those that find them, and health to all their flesh. And the Message version of Proverbs 4:20-22 says, dear friend, listen well to my words. Tune your ears to my voice. Keep my message in plain view at all times. Concentrate. Learn it by heart. Those who discover these words really live, body and soul. They're bursting with health. And that word incline, it lets us know that it's a process word. In Hebrew, it actually means to stretch out, or to spread out, to bend away. It means to apply with a bow, or extend, to bow down, or to turn, or to intend. So inclining actually entails work. So if I bent down right now, it requires me to do something. And so you would actually have to bend your thoughts, your feelings, your ideologies, your inquiries, your will, your intent, your purposes towards God, because it says incline to Him. Okay. And then exchange His attributes for that divine wellness that He's promising that you're going to get once you incline yourself, once you posture yourself in that place of wanting to hear truth, wanting to hear what God is saying, wanting what the same thing that God wants. Because a lot of times, like you said, we're so busy wanting what we want instead of what does God want in this situation. And so when we don't allow ourselves to incline, it actually brings about grave consequences. It really brings us to a place where we are rejecting God's will We are rejecting truth. We're rejecting comfort, peace, and even healing. And we're remaining in that anguish place in our own desires, and just being stuck in grief. And so we really have to take in God's word like medicine. And so when we're inclining ourselves, we're saying, I'm going to drink this medicine. I'm going to drink this truth. I'm going to take it in, and I'm going to allow, as I take it in and I incline my thoughts, what I want, my will, I'm going to exchange his medicine, for his medicine so that I can receive his healing. And so that is so very important in the grief process, because if you don't do that, you will stay stuck and bound. And then that grief is eating you up on the inside. And when you are eating up like that, the word talks about bitter wells and bitter waters. You literally become bitter in your soul. And then, you live in that place of marrow, which is mourning and sorrow, in seasons and even just daily for the rest of your life, if you don't come out of that mourning place. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, that was very good. So I would dive deeper into that and just ask, so what would you all say is the first step into coming out of that stuck place? Because there might be some people listening that are saying, okay, well, how do I incline? What does incline look like in my daily life? How do I get from out of this stuck place? I have so many thoughts. I have so many emotions. And so what would you both say is a first step or initial shift to come from out of that stuck place?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really good question. And even as Apostle and you were sharing, Nina, in regards to the process of grieving and being angry with God and things of that nature, someone in particular came to mind who was dealing with a death, someone that I know that was an act of free will in regards to that person being murdered. And so when I think about the grieving process for someone who is ready to be with God versus a young teen or a young adult who hasn't lived their life, it's a little different to commune with God in regards to carrying their legacy, because they haven't gotten the chance to even write their story. Like there's so much more that goes into that process. The anger with the offender, the anger with the murderer, the anger with God, the challenge with the family being left behind, and whatever the case may be. And so one of the things that I had to think about, because that anger is real, and that's something that people can't tell you, hey, by this time you should be angry anymore. By this time you should have forgiven that offender or that murderer. That is a process between that person and God, and we don't know how long it's going to last. But one of the things that I have been hearing and seeing is that literally giving up that anger has to be a sacrifice. It's a literal sacrifice. And so you have to make the decision to literally trade in that anger for the things that Apostle was sharing in regards to what he wants to give you, what his medicine is, what his healing is. And so I think a lot of people who are in the grieving process, they have to come to the end of themselves, and they have to be tired of being angry. Unless they have gotten to that point to where they no longer want to be stuck. Because one of the things that I have noticed is that there is an entitlement in anger. If I stop being angry with you, maybe that means that I forgave you. Maybe that means you're getting away with the offense, or you're getting away with the thing that you have done. And so I think it's a literal sacrifice where we have to surrender up that anger and say, God, I don't know what to do with this. I'm angry. I'm upset. I am still mad. But can you give me something in exchange for this sacrifice? I'm willing to put my anger on the altar. I'm willing to put my emotions, my pain, all of these built up things that I'm still entitled to have. I'm ready to trade them off. And I think the person has to come into that place of being ready to do that. If they're not ready to do that, anger will become a comfort. Anger will become a sense of entitlement. It'll become a place. And so I think that person, the first step is coming into the position to where you understand, okay, I'm ready to give this up and I'm ready to exchange this for what God has, and literally putting that on the altar, putting that up as a sacrifice for the Lord to handle and give you something in exchange for that anger to help you process the grieving. Because no matter how much we want to stay in that place, anger, you can only anger so long and sin not. And eventually bitter root might creep in. Eventually unforgiveness might creep in. Eventually hatred might creep in. And so anger is not an emotion that is supposed to be in a prolonged state. If it continues, it can become a heart issue. And so I think that person has to first decide that they're ready to give that anger to God, and then ask God, what does my life in this grieving process look like without anger? Because you're still allowed to grieve. You're still allowed to be sad. You're still allowed to process through it. But what can he give you in exchange that is not going to keep you stuck, where you're able to take that revelation and that exchange that God gives you and move forward in the grieving process rather than being stuck in the pain and the anguish? And so I think a sacrifice has to be given up to really allow God to give you something in exchange and give you revelation and wisdom on how to process that out from a healthy place. And so that can definitely go into those stages, like I said earlier, of grief, where you process from anger to acceptance, where you come into a place of saying, okay, all right, God, like I'm ready to give you this anger. Can you give me the grace to begin to accept that this is our reality now? And what does this new reality look like? What does life without this person look like? Like they were saying earlier, how can I carry on their legacy? What are some things that maybe they wanted to do that they were not able to do, that I'm still here in the earth and I'm able to do, and really beginning to get a revelation of how to carry on without that person. But until you have given up that anger and accepted the death, I think it's very, very hard to process out of the anger phase. So that's one of the first steps that I would take in that process.
That's good. You shared pretty much a process that I wrote down here, which is make the decision, sacrifice, and exchange. Those are the 3 points, major points that I got from what Mercedes just shared. Just to summarize it, is coming to a place where you make a decision, you sacrifice that anger, and then you get ready to exchange that anger for whatever God wants to give in that area. Apostle, did you have anything to share on that? Some first steps?
Yes, those, what Mercedes said was excellent. I would say also, you want to recognize where you are in the grief process and whether or not you can process by yourself, or if you need a counselor to help you, if you need someone to assist you with your grief process, or what have you. I think that's important too. I think also, being mindful of you, even though we don't own one another. And so a lot of times when we have come into relationship with one another, we have claimed each other for life and eternity, but we don't get to determine how long that is. That's not really our role or what have you. It's our perceived perception that we're going to be here forever, but that's not realistic. We actually live for the purpose of dying, and so that we could transition in eternity with God, or transition in eternity in hell. So we're not going to be in this earth all, forever. And so just really understanding that, that death is a part of life. It's a part of our process and our journey, or what have you. And, just recognizing that we don't dictate that part of our journey per se, that really the ultimate decision is not in our hands. But also even when, I I would encourage people to search out if they have soul ties that are keeping them bound to the person that died, if they have strongholds that are keeping them bound. Because a lot of times when we're like, I can't live without this person, and we're living from that posture, it's generally because we have had, we say, we gonna be together forever. Like I said with my friend, that, we had already had plans and would joke about how we was going to be sitting on the porch at 80 years old, talking about people, joning on people that passed by. We already had all these, plans, or what have you. And so, we do see, we perceive our future with one another without really even asking God if we're going to have a future together. And so, but even if we don't ask God if we're going to have a future together, how do we embrace the truth of that? And so sometimes there could be some things that are spiritually tying us to harbor and hold on to the grief that we may not naturally see, like the soul ties that we have created through our bonding of our words and through our vows to one another, to our loyalties to one another, just our mindsets, or what have you. And so, if we're talking about a husband, of course, I'm expecting to live with you a long life. I'm not expecting to be married for 2 years and you pass away. I'm not expecting for you to be married for 10 years and pass away. I mean, that's understandable. And rightfully so. But as we would have to endure something like that, how do we come out of the grieving process? And so, part of that would be breaking soul ties with those vows, breaking soul ties with that person, or what have you. Because we, essentially what could happen if you stay stuck in grief too long, you actually begin to live in Sheol, which is the death realm, with that person. And that person is dead. And that person might not even be in the death realm. They could have already gone on to be with God or wherever they're going to go. And so you're essentially allowing yourself to go to a depressed state in your spirit, where even though you're living, you're like the living dead. Okay. And that's because you're still so tied to the person that has passed away, and they're dead. So part of you is still feeling dead because they are dead. You see what I'm saying? And so, and they're not coming back. And so you're expecting something to resurrect, that's not going to resurrect. And so you have to literally break that soul tie with that and come into a truth and reality of allowing that the truth and reality of that person pass away and moving on with the Lord to be your truth. And I'm going to talk more about that in my grief and loss series. So I don't want to give all my keys in the live because I don't want to offend anyone where they don't hear the full revelation of what I'm saying, and where I can also answer questions that they may have concerning the revelation that I have. But I do talk about this in Processing the Grief and Loss book. So I would encourage you to get the book. But it is definitely important to break those mindsets, to cast down those mindsets that you have about that person being dead, about all the mindsets you have about why they should still be here, all the mindsets about, any woulda, shoulda, couldas, and regrets that you have. It's also important to even just break the power of any unhealthy emotions and strongholds around your ideologies, because sometimes you have, we could go to such a place in grieving that a spirit could come in and oppress us, or those emotions have literally stronghold us in a mindset, and it's hard to break out of that mindset without actually doing deliverance ministry. So a lot of times we're trying to willpower ourselves out of it. We trying to talk ourselves out of it. But the word says that a strong man has to be cast out of the house. Okay. And, and then if there is an oppressive spirit that has come in, that spirit has to be cast out. The word also says cast down every vain imagination. So these things can become vain imaginations where we feel so justified in our grief. We're stuck in our haughtiness of wanted it our way, and it has become a vain imagination that has exalted itself above God, where we can't move past it. And so when we hit these whole strongholds and walls, we need to recognize it. So I would even say that people need to process, have I come to this place? Have I come to a place where where an oppressive spirit of grief and depression has come in, or anger? Have I come to a place where I'm literally stronghold in my perception and what I want about that person? And now it literally exalted itself and become God in my life. And so I can't hear God. I can't commune with God. I can't move past it. Okay. And so those are just some things, but please attend the Grief and Loss webinar, because I will be sharing a lot of these keys in detail, and then you will get to ask questions concerning your personal situation and receive inner healing in relations to that as well. So.
Yes, I was just actually going to talk about that. Apostle Taquita and Coach Mercedes have been dropping some fire today, and they have been giving you some information and some revelation and even personal testimonies that they are going to be diving further into during the Processing Through Grief and Loss with God series. I put the link in the comments. So go down into the comments, click on that link, and sign up for the Grief and Loss series today, right now. Sign up for that. We are only touching the surface here, and even though we have created an open space for dialogue, they have spent time preparing for this series, and it will be a 5-hour long series, Friday night and Saturday night, February 25th and February 26th. And that's 5 hours total of pouring out on this topic, of praying with you, answering your questions, listening to your personal testimony and experiences, and really seeking God on your behalf, so that when you leave that series, you have shifted and elevated to a greater level of understanding, a greater level of clarity, and you have really truly received some in-depth healing and deliverance from any way you have been stuck and stunted in your process of truly making it through grief and loss, to the other side of joy, of restored life, of restored purpose. And so go down into the comments now and sign up. And I also put the link to the book, the Processing Through Grief and Loss book. The link to that is also in the comments. Get your book. This is something that you will walk with throughout your life, and you can even use this to help a friend, help a family member, help someone in your church. Cynthia in the comments shared that she is a chaplain. And so this teaching has been a great blessing for her. So if you are in the workforce in different areas, like Cynthia mentioned, if you are a minister in your church, or even if you are an encourager on your natural daily job, you can get this book and use it to help the person next to you. And so, yes, visit kingdomshiftingbooks.com. And matter of fact, just use that link that I put in the comments. This is really going to be a great time of truly seeking God and hearing from God, because there are so many misperceptions and misunderstandings around this topic of grief and loss, and especially at a time like this where we have been losing a lot of people to COVID, losing a lot of people through suicide, and the younger generation has been dealing a lot with suicide ideation. We need to know how to help people process through grief and loss, even if it's something that they feel that they have lost in their identity or lost in their perspective of self, in their perspective of having a joy and a purpose about life. And so this is such an important topic. And so I want to go ahead and ask just another question connected to what you all have already been sharing. And it is, what do you say to the person that says, I'll never stop grieving? And this is something that we see so common, where people say, I'll never stop grieving. I'll never be over that. I'll always miss that person, and of course you will. But what do you say to a person that is in an unhealthy place of saying, I'll never stop grieving? How do we help them?
I would definitely question and ask that person, are they willing to exchange that pain for something different? Are they willing to allow God to give them the ability and the supernatural strength to get through that process? Because at the end of the day, if you are only doing it by yourself and you're not inviting God into the grieving process, that might be a true statement. You might be carrying that on forever, but I would just ask them if they're willing, if they're open, if that is a possibility for them to allow God into that process. And then if that is something that they're willing to do, I personally would really have that conversation about the importance of renouncing and breaking those word curses that they have spoken over their life and over their grieving process. And even as Apostle shared earlier, even the word curses that they have with the soul ties that they have with the word curses. Because what I see is that there are some people who have come into a place where they have truly accepted the fact that this is their reality. And what I mean by that is, they're not willing to come out of the grieving process. They are comfortable there. They are stuck there. They do not want anything else, and even made some promises and some vows to that person who has passed, where I'm never going to forget about you. I'm never going to, they almost feel like it's an honoring. They're honoring them by staying in that process. They're honoring them by not coming out of that grief, and even a guilt associated with, if I stop grieving, if I walk away and go into a different direction, if I choose to heal completely from this grief and stop being consumed by it, I'm doing them a disservice, or I'm dishonoring their legacy, or I'm not going to, how would they feel if I was to move on? If I was to move on, so-and-so, they would be upset. They would be so mad. They would be hurt. So then they stay in that place of, cycling through the grief cycle, and they're never able to get out. And so I would say that is definitely a high imagination. Because some people come into a place to where they literally entertain the grief so much that they're still doing the same things that they did for that partner. They haven't come out of the routines that have taken place. And sometimes that will take time. But when you consciously choose to continue to engage from that place, you can shift over to, one, having a split where you really think that you're still communing with that person, and two, never really coming into a place of healing because you're engaging as if that person is still here. And so my biggest thing would just be like, are you willing to receive healing in this area. I know it feels like it won't ever be over. I know it feels like this is a lifelong sentence, but grief was never meant to be a prison sentence. Are you willing to be free? Are you ready? Do you want to be free? And if they don't want to be free, and if they're not ready to be free, I just recommend that that's somebody that you're going to have to really pray for, because they have made their bed in the grieving process. They're living in it. Some people have gotten in the coffin spiritually, mentally, with that person who has died. And so that person really has to come into a place of, really accepting the fact that God does want to heal you, and he wants to be a part of that process, and he wants to grieve with you so that you can move forward and honor that person in a healthy way. And so that would be my question for them, because if they don't have that desire, it's very hard to move forward. So breaking those things off of their life is very important if they're willing and ready to experience the healing and the supernatural ability to grieve with God.
My God, she says some people have literally gotten into the coffin, but you are still here. And so you're living in two places, but you can't live in two places at one time. You have to either walk in life or walk in grief and depression. And so she made a great point. I know we see like comedy movies and things where, Medea movies where we've seen people fall and jump into the caskets with people, but that isn't fake. That can be real in your life if you're not really processing through grief and loss from a healthy place. And so, Apostle, did you have anything to share on that topic? What do you say, or how do you help a person that says, I'll never stop grieving, I'll always be this way?
In my book, Processing Grief and Loss, I actually talk about the spirit of the coffin, because I have a chapter in there where I deal with spirits that deal death. And one of them is the coffin spirit. And literally, this is where, like Mercedes said, where you're just grieving and you just literally have just incantated yourself inside a box. When you say, I never stop grieving, you have bewitched yourself with your own vow of dread and depression and doom and gloom for the rest of your life, or until you decide, okay, I am going to stop grieving, or what have you. But basically, you have released a word curse upon yourself that has coffined you in to a place of grief and not living anymore. So you have literally coffined yourself into a life of just living death, even though you're living. And so if you're not careful with the words that you speak, it can open the door to literal spirits of the coffin to come in, and you literally are living in this dark place and even start to look dead even though you are alive. Okay. And so, and then that spirit literally buries you. You feel like you're just buried. And so everybody that talks to you, they're just like, this person is just so depressed. They're so grieved and downtrodden, or what have you. And you can live through that vow, and where that oppressed spirit come in, where everything that you say and everything that you do just spews death. And, where people just start to not really want to even be around you because you don't want to live. And the truth of the matter is, I have watched a movie on I'll have to find that movie and put the link up, but there was a mother in that movie that they had lost a son, and everybody in the house was saying, we need to live, and the mother did not want to move on, and eventually the husband had to separate and take the children and, go live a different life, because the mother did not want to move on. She was stuck in the coffin from her son dying. And basically they was like, we can live. We need to live. It's time. We've been grieving for 7-8 years. It's time to move on. And she just could not move on. And so that vow or that pain of grief had been stronghold her. And, where the oppressive spirit had come in and just coffined her in, and she wasn't willing to move. It had literally become a stronghold of pride in her grief. That she didn't want to move on. And so I would say that if you make a vow like that, you're going to live it. You're going to live it. And the only person that can break that vow is you. You have to want to come up out of the coffin. You have to want to live. You have to know that it was never meant for you to mourn for life. There is a time to live, a time to die, a time to laugh, a time to mourn. And so there is a season that we are to mourn. And that season was never meant to be for years and years and years and years. So that means that God has medicine to bring healing to us, but you have to come into agreement with that medicine. Also, God is not going to violate your free will. So if you vow that I'm going to grieve for the rest of my life, I'm never going to be happy again, then, he can't go past that free will of your choice to live that way. And so you're expecting God to heal you from something that you're not willing to give up, that has literally become your God in your life. And so it is definitely about that exchange, and you have to want to be free from that exchange. And then just recognizing that when you start to live from that place where you're really living it, you have crossed over to not just a loyalty to that person. You have crossed over to having an open door of a demonic spirit coming in and oppressing you, and causing your life to be worse as it relates to grief and loss. Because now you're going into trauma state. Now you're going into mental illness, because the depression is just not a stage of grief anymore. You're literally living the depression. So your mental state is being pulled into a mental illness. You see what I'm saying? And so you have to really be careful about that. And so if you have made those type of vows, I would encourage you to really cry out to the Lord and say, help me to, I renounce these vows. I break covenants with them. I break them every way that I have incantated myself in. That means that you have boxed yourself into a spell that you have released upon yourself through your own words. And I break these incantations, and I want to live. And Lord, teach me how to live without this person. And so even in counseling, that's what I would be working with the person on. How do you live with continue to go on? What does your life look like even as this person is no longer a part of your life? So.
Well, yes, thank you for everything that you share. You're giving people a little taste of the series that is coming up.
Yes.
Thank you for everything that you shared there. And thank you, Cynthia, in the comments for what you're sharing. She said this is a topic that needs to be talked about in the church and even in the Black community as well. And I agree with both of those factors. And even while Apostle was sharing, I was just hearing that this teaching is so important series. This book is so important because it is creating a paradigm shift in the body of Christ. And when you look up the word paradigm, it means a model or pattern for something that may be copied, a theory or a group of ideas about how something should be done, made, or thought about, a new study that challenges the current evolutionary. And so the current evolutionary that we have around grief and loss can not only just be categorized as maybe some religious aspects that may more so fall under the category of encouraging words or words of comfort just to help the person in the moment. But it can also be categorized under the perspective of just ignorance and lack of knowledge. Even while Apostle was sharing, I also heard that we know the scriptures, however, we are not loaded with them. Our weapons are not loaded with the scriptures. Mm-hmm. And so we know what the word of God says. However, they're not in their proper position in our lives and in our theology to apply those scriptures to daily life experiences. Mm-hmm. And so that's when it becomes religious, because we know it, but we don't live it. Mm-hmm. And we know it's a pattern. It's a habit. It's a quick word and quick thing to say. However, when the heat is up, when the challenges are bad, we don't know how to apply the word of God to our lives. And so I agree with you, Cynthia, in that, and others in the comments, that this teaching is definitely so important. And so make sure that as you're on this live, that you share it and that you tag somebody who you think can benefit from what is being shared today. And so I just want to close out with just one last thing. Give us a few positive outlook points about what is on the other side of the process. And so we've talked about the anger. We've talked about processing through breaking vows over how you're going to continue to be grieving forever, and how to be vulnerable with God and really talk with him. What can we share with people to tell them and to show them what is on the other side of this grief process?
I would say that on the other side of grief is life. And I believe that, the scripture tells us, it talks a lot about how, of course, the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but God came so that we may have life and that more abundantly. And I think that we have to remember that there's life. There's life after the person's death. There's life after the tragedy, and there's abundance. And so you don't necessarily know what is going to take place. You don't know what God has in store for you. But if you don't choose to keep living, you'll never receive it. You won't be able to live it out. You won't be able to uncover and discover what God has next for your destiny. What is your purpose? Who are you supposed to be in the earth? And so I see that grief can definitely be a destiny killing spirit. And God doesn't want that for you. He wants you to be able to grieve in a healthy way and then fulfill your assignment. You don't want to get so stuck in the grieving process that you stay there forever. And then when your time is to come, you didn't fulfill your purpose. You didn't fulfill what God has for you. And so I think you have to be willing to ask God, what is on the other side of this? What is on the other side of this for me? What does that look like? What does that sound like? I would even go as far as to asking God for some promises for your life specifically, so that you have something tangible to hold on to. It's one thing for me to say, so for myself personally, one of the big things that I wanted my grandmother to be able to do was go to my graduation when I graduated college. I'm one of the first people in our family to graduate college, so that was very important for me. And so that was something that I really desired and I really wanted. But even when she passed, there were some promises on the other side. Was I supposed to get so stuck in the grief process that I didn't walk across the stage and stop doing my schoolwork? I stopped pressing forward. I forgot what it was that God had set before me and promised me. No, I'm going to, I had to go come into a place to where I healed and I continued to move forward, not just for her, but for myself, because God had something that he had promised me. So the promises don't get aborted just because death happens. The promises don't go away just because you come into a place of grieving. And so you have to ask God for a clear vision. of what he has for your life, because there's so much abundance. There's so many blessings, so many open doors that are waiting for you, but you will never be able to access them if you stay stuck in the process of grief. So I would just say life and that more abundantly is on the other side, because God overcame, and he took the keys to death, hell, and the grave. And so that means you have access to those keys too. So it doesn't stop with death. It doesn't stop with someone, living out their process and, taking that course and passing away. There's so much more. And he wants to help you overcome as well. And so that's what I would say. There's just so much more life left for you to live after that person has passed.
Yeah. Awesome. I would say that on the other side also is a greater relationship with God, because one of the things that grief causes you to do, you have to rely on the supernatural power of God, and you have to bend your will and incline yourself to the truth of God and to his presence, and really posturing yourself to a place where you can receive from his presence and receive from his voice. And so as you will receive truth, you will begin to learn some things about yourself and about God that you didn't even know, and that you would have not known unless you have allowed yourself to process in this way with God. And even just recognizing that even the most difficult thing that I have ever experienced in my life, I could still go to God for. I could go to God in truth. I don't have to go to God in religion. I don't have to sugarcoat. I don't have to act like I don't feel the way that I do or think the way that I could do. I could go to God exactly how I am in my brokenness and say, I'm upset about this decision. I'm angry with you. I'm angry with this person, that person. I'm mad about the funeral arrangements, whatever it is that you're upset about, and hear God's heart for the matter. Because some things God may be upset about. So a lot of times we think that God is not hurting with us, and God is right there in the process with us. He's right there understanding our pain with us. And so I think you learn God in a whole new way. You learn him in a way that you did not realize that you needed, and that you did not realize was necessary, and that you only get by evolving in a greater dimension of relationship with God, because we are generally so surface with God, and so we tiptoe in and around him, because we think that if we have challenges with him or with something that is happening in life, that we can't speak our truth, or that we can't have a deep conversation with God. We can't question, certain things. And he's the only one who has the answer. So how can I not go to the person who has the answer and get truth? And so I think you come into a greater relationship with God. I think also you come into a place of some things about life we never gonna understand. There are some things about life that are mysteries that just are too baffling to understand. Like I could never understand how a woman could help with sex trafficking, but it happens every day, all day. Okay. There's other things that I just can't, I just don't understand in my own mind and thinking, and I can chop it up, yes, to evil and just to things like that. But there's a lot of things that we're not going to understand, but, there are mysteries to this world. And so I think we learn to regard certain things, and be okay that we don't have to stay in trauma just because we don't understand. We can still have peace even though we don't understand. We can still have life and wellness even though we don't understand. And that God still covers us in that area that we don't understand. Because sometimes people aren't processing forward because they don't understand. And so now they fear what they don't understand, or they fear something else happening, or they fear, and so that fear has gripped them from being able to really process through and push through. And so that would be what I think you would get. My experiences allowed me to learn how to ask God hard questions, truth, how to engage God in the processes. So even now, as people would come and they would say, pray for my loved one, she in the hospital with cancer, and on and on, I began to ask God, what is your will? What is your purpose? How do I pray for this person? What is my purpose in this situation? Because they're asking me to pray. That may not be my purpose. God may have sent them for something to me for something else, or what have you. And so I began to ask God, or is this person supposed to live? Is this person's time to go? And then I began to even be able to say, God, okay, can we have a few more years? Can we have a few more of this or what? And God would tell me, no, we can't have a few more years. Yes, we can have a few more years. Yes, I've given you power to break death off of that person. And so I'll have answers that I wouldn't have had before, because before I wasn't asking those questions. I was just working the principles of the word, but I wasn't working them through relationship with God. And that's a whole nother life of how we work the principles. I'm working my faith, but I'm not working it through relationship with God, where my faith is aligning up with how he is working the situation. So that would be my last final comment.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you both for everything that you have poured out today. We've been on here for a little time, so we blessed y'all with some extra pour today. So make sure you go ahead and get your book, Processing Through Grief and Loss, at kingdomshiftingbooks.com. Like I shared, I did put the link down in the comments below. And I also put the link to the Processing Through Grief and Loss series that we will be having February 25th and February 26th, where it will be full time dedicated to pouring out in the areas of processing through grief and loss, praying for you, answering questions, listening to your personal experiences and testimonies, and being able to see God on how to help you heal and shift forward in your process, in your personal process through grief and loss. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we will be back next Tuesday for a Facebook Live at 7 p.m. So continue to join us. Put it on your calendar and invite somebody else. Let them know that we're going to be on. I agree with everything that has been shared in that this is such a needed topic. And so if you know that this is a needed topic, go ahead and help us push this and get the word out so that people can truly receive from what God is saying in this hour, because it is so important for people to know how to process through grief and loss with God being the key. Okay, so thank you, everybody. Did anyone have anything else to share before I close out?
I was just going to say that too, that, it's so important to share the lives. So many people are grieving. And if this was a prophetic word or anything like that, or prophecy, this would have thousands of, followers or, shares or what have you. But people are grieving.